All right. Okay. Welcome everyone. This is episode 3 of the Turning Point podcast here at BYU.
Yeah.
We're kind of here in a little bit of a different space. We couldn't get the podcast room, but we work with what we have,
Yeah.
I think it's a fun little switch up. We got like the library in the background and stuff.
I like these seats better.
I know, it's kind of comfy.
Yeah,
I don't have the table there.
No.
I don't have to deal with the mic.
I know, the stupid mic. I feel like I'm touching
I know,
it
it's
all
just
the
like...
time. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they get to see our outfits, so I hope you guys like it.
Yeah, Jackson's fitted up right now. He's got some boots on.
Anyway, so we're going to talk about capitalism today, free markets. But something cool, we have our social that at the end of this month, kind of last fall, we did something similar where we kind of got together, had pizza, had music. So we're going to do something like that again at the end of this month. Go check out our Instagram for more details. That's going to be awesome. And then Save-Link, we're trying to experiment more locations, better times. If you're interested, if you want to come debate, if you want to come sign up and learn more about Turning Point, that's the place. So just be posting on our Instagram.
Yeah, 100%. Pull up to the events. The social is going to be awesome here at the end of the month. So pull up. We'll probably both be there.
Yeah, hopefully that'd be awesome. You can meet the podcasters. We have like 100 fans.
100 fans, and all of them probably already follow my Instagram.
Oh yeah,
our Instagram.
Right.
And the rest are probably my parents.
Yeah, no, right? My relatives.
Yeah.
And the random people that I follow.
That's probably it.
Anyway, so free markets. I'm so excited to talk about this.
Yeah, me too.
This is one. So what we're going to do, right, we kind of talked about this before. We're going to try to represent both sides like we do. Be logical, be honest. But something that I really kind of want to take a stance at, and I think people are confused, is what is capitalism?
Right.
For example, we were doing interviews at a table, and we had a kid on a bike come pull up, and he says, I don't think we live in a capitalistic society. We live in a consumerism society. I don't know. He said it weird. But he's like, we're consumers. We don't live in a capitalist society. So I just want to hear your thoughts. What do you think capitalism is? What do people get wrong about it? Like, what are we talking about when we talk about capitalism?
Right, for sure. I think at the end of the day, capitalism is... we don't live in a perfect capitalist society here in the United States, but we're really close, And what a capitalist society is the opportunity for free markets to operate within an area,
Right.
A free market being the ability for individuals to trade and exchange goods and services for an incentive or for payment or for trading with another for something that they deem to have equal value, I guess.
Right.
So super, super interesting. And I honestly think it's the reason why the United States is so successful is because we were really one of the first countries in the world to adopt a full capitalist free market society.
Right.
And it allowed us to see a lot of like innovation and research and creation and just growth in general here in the United States,
And I really like what you said. There's an incentive.
Right.
And I think people forget about that because we have all these innovations, we have all these increases in technology and the standard of living, but there's also personal incentives to create that. And so I agree. There's a defender of capitalism, we both love her, Ayn Rand, and something she talks about that capitalism is, it's the voluntary interactions between man.
Right.
Because I have my product and I have my desire to be wealthy or have whatever kind of life, and I can give it to you in exchange for your time, your value, your money, and it's voluntary.
Right. Exactly.
Other people don't have to come in, tell you how much it costs, tell you have to buy it, and we're both happy we both get what we want. So I think that's very important to kind of preface when we're talking about capitalism. Voluntary, it's you receive a lot of payment for stuff that you build, and I don't know, it's interactive.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's, at the end of the day, it's the largest economic party or camp or whatever you'd call it. It's how the world runs is under capitalist policies. The biggest contender to capitalism would be socialism, right? Which would be the governing body within a country or a group of individuals or a community decides to take the means of production, which would be in a capitalist society, the businesses that create and produce value, and do it on its own to distribute wealth equally among people. That's what a socialist society is, right?
Right.
And so I think it's super interesting that we're having this conversation, because I think what we're going to do is try to look at the ins and outs of both socialism and capitalism as like economic camps of thinking, and try to look at different arguments for and against each of them.
Right.
And by doing so, we'll be able to better understand economic policy here in the United States and throughout the world, and based on that, based on that information, make decisions that are educated to choose what we feel is right.
Right, and I think that's a great place to start. Let's talk socialism. You kind of gave a great introduction of what it is. It's the public, the overall tribe, the overall people taking that means of production from the individual. I kind of looked into Karl Marx, kind of known as the father of socialism. He really thought that capitalism was evil because he lived during the time of the Industrial Revolution, and he lived in England. So he saw that a lot of middle class and poor class citizens were giving a lot of time in these factories and making these big productions and big products that they ultimately didn't have really a part of. And so he called it primitive accumulation, which was that they were losing a part of themselves even though that they were building something. There was no connection between it. So I work 40 hours, let's say I work 40, 50 hours in a factory building something for somebody else.
Right.
I'm not getting rewarded for A, my production, but B, I'm losing a part of myself. That's what something Karl Marx talked about, that you're losing a part of yourself working so long in this factory, and even though you're receiving benefit, receiving pay, you don't get to live life. You're not enjoying it because you're forced to work. And you're kind of dependent on these big corporations, these big top individuals.
Right.
I don't know, what do you think about that?
I think it's a super interesting argument, because I'm kind of the kind of person who also, I can't see myself working like in a factory. I can't see myself working at a desk for someone for like the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Like, I'm an entrepreneur, and that's what I want to do for the rest of my life, is work for myself, right? So I think it has a super, super big appeal to people like that who don't want to live their lives controlled, if that makes sense.
No, it does.
But I think it's super interesting, because you then take something that I feel like is a desire that most of us have, which is to be free. In this case, free from that, like the monotony of going to work every single day and working the same job, having a 9 to 5, just so you can survive. Right. It takes that thing that most of us dislike, and it tries to come up with a solution, right? But I think it's interesting because it tries to take that solution and put it in the government's hands, as opposed to a lot of people who are like more freedom driven and influenced by like entrepreneurial thinking, who want to take it the opposite route, which is take it even further out of the government's hands, so that the individual has the opportunity to think for themselves and escape this matrix or system, so to speak. You know?
So what you're kind of saying is, the rebuttal, I guess, would say is there's people that, and you agree with, that they're kind of losing their life in a 100%. Sense of following these and working 9 to 5s, and it's costing them a lot.
Right.
But instead of giving it to the government to solve their problems, they should take initiative, take charge, create something, be an entrepreneur, work for yourself, give something to the market in order to get out of that.
Right.
Is that where you're
And I think
saying?
more than anything, my point is that I can relate to that basic concept of wanting to be outside of the system.
Right.
You know? And so, which is why I think a lot of people find value in this way of thinking. You know?
Yeah. I think that's very good. I think let's kind of keep going on with it. Some main contention that I saw that he was kind of arguing was private property. So I think it's good to talk about what Turning Point thinks about private property. And what I personally think, and many philosophers before me, we have the right of property, which means our body and whatever it produces, the labor, the means of production, the value, whatever we create is ours. We have the right to that. We have an ownership to that. And so whatever comes from my time, whatever comes from my labor, should be protected by the government.
Right.
That's kind of the sense of why we made government. And that's something Turning Point advocates for a lot, is that we have this limited government that's only job is, one of the functions of the government is to protect this property and protect these creations and the means of productions that we have.
Right.
What do you think about?
Yeah, I think like
property.
What the thing is, it would come down to is like the socialist argument against that, right? Is that at the end of the day, the workers aren't receiving like what they're getting, right? I think an argument that I hear a lot is like, it's the people who own the businesses, right? It's the managers who are making all the money off the backs of everyone who's like working on the factory floor, right? And so I think the argument against it is that like at the end of the day, I don't actually own the property that I produced. And that's kind of the outlook of like a socialist, right? Is that I'm not receiving the direct benefit of what I'm producing. And so I'm not really having a right to property. And so the government should restrict these higher up individuals, these managers and these business owners from being able to take all of the profit that comes from, I mean, my work at the end of the day, right? And give it back to me. And everyone should be equally paid for their labor, and we should distribute the wealth so that we can build a functional community that works together, right? That's the argument I hear all the time, you know? I don't know. What do you think about that, Jaxon?
No,
what do you think like a good rebuttal against that would be, or I don't know, I guess some points in favor of that? What do you think?
I think that's so true, and that I definitely saw that with Karl Marx. He was like, yeah, I get there's this idea of private property, but for 9/10 of us, that doesn't exist. Like we're still barely surviving. We're not receiving the adequate pay for what we're creating in relation to the business owners. So I think a great rebuttal, and Ayn Rand does a phenomenal job of talking about this, is that we are rational creatures, right? And we have our mind and our abilities to survive. And capitalism rewards those who use their intellect to really, how do I put this? Uses their intellect to survive, and it rewards those who do it well, and who give the most value to society. I think a great example of this would be the creator of the iPhone. The creator of the iPhone, or Apple, let's talk about Apple, they provided a product that was very valuable for everybody. So even though that the workers maybe didn't get the same amount of relationship of physical labor that they did with Steve Jobs or the other creators of Apple, because they're millionaires and the workers aren't. The argument is, that Ayn Rand talks about, is they are receiving all the intellectual rewards from the creation of Apple or creation of the iPhone, and Steve Jobs isn't receiving the same amount of intellectual rewards as they are. For example, they just have to give physical labor and they enjoy the iPhone and they get paid. All Steve Jobs had to do, he had to use his intellect, and he's not having other people create an iPhone for him, and he's not getting paid in relation to his intellect. So I think a good argument and a rebuttal against that is, let's stop focusing more on the physical labor, victim mindset, I'm giving the 9 to 5, I'm being dependent. You got to realize the top people, they're not getting rewarded to the same extent you are. Maybe not monetarily they are, but overall intellectually, they're not receiving those same benefits of the tools, because you're not making an iPhone for them. You're not making their life easier if you're just working 9 to 5, other than somebody in comparison to these top leaders. I don't know, do you kind of follow that? It's kind of a complex. So I did, like, imagine a triangle. You have the top producers, they have their, whatever they're producing, the iPhone. The bottom producers are the bottom of the triangle. They're receiving all the reward. They're receiving monetary for working and building it, but they're also receiving the intellectual ideas and intellectual advancements of the top. But the top is not receiving that same benefit. Well, unless you open it to the whole market, then yeah, other innovators. But I would say it's very equal. If I was created the iPhone, I would want somebody to create the iPhone for me, but I'm getting rewarded for my thoughts and my intellect and my ability. And overall the risk.
Yeah, for sure. Which totally makes sense. Like at the end of the day, like are a lot of innovators and creators in the world, like there is a intellectual risk that they have to take, and there's financial risks that they have to take, and so they receive a reward for that, you know? I think it's super interesting as well because, I don't know, I just hear like a lot of arguments are in this kind of vein where it's like at the end of the day, like we just get trapped, but like how socialism would operate, right? In a dream socialist country is that everyone would have a job and they have to work a certain number of hours in that job so that they get their equal share of like the equal distribution. Which it kind of, in my mind, I don't know, maybe this is just me, but it kind of defeats the whole purpose of like either way you're forced to work in a factory, you know? But in one situation, you're forced to like there's no reason why you should like try to progress because you're going to get paid the same as everyone else, right? While in another system, there is this incentive to grow and to become better and to build, you know?
Right.
Like in a socialist, in a true dream socialist situation, right? Let's say like everyone all around gets paid $50 an hour, right? At the end of the day, no one's going to try to do a better job than everyone who works around them or want to go to college for 4 years or 7 years to be a doctor or 12 years to be a doctor, right? Because at the end of the day, they're just going to make $50 an hour like everyone else, you know? Why should they take that opportunity risk and that cost to be able to receive the same amount of stuff, you know? And so at the end of the day, I think it just all comes back around, right? No matter what, in both systems, someone is going to have to work bad jobs that they hate. Someone is going to have to lose themselves, like you were talking about before. The question is whether or not that person has the opportunity to escape that box and to find themselves and to become better, because there's incentive, like there's in capitalism, where you have the chance to escape that box, or in socialism, where it's, this is your job, this is what you're doing, there's no reason why you should get outside of this box, just stay there, and everything will be good, you know? And that's like the ideal socialist society is that people will have this opportunity to even make that much money. In reality, in action, every socialist country that has ever existed, Venezuela, Cuba, the USSR, China, all of these countries have got worse the more they implement socialist policies, and have got better the more they implement free market ideas, you know?
And I think you put that beautifully. They're gonna be stuck working anyway. And there's gonna be no freedom. And it really kind of relates to the other principles of individual freedom and that limited market. I think two things we should touch on as going forward is something that I saw that Bernie Sanders, I think it's coined, is his phrase, is he talks about democratic socialism. So I think let's touch on that, let's explore that, and then explore monopolies and antitrust. I think that's a valid argument against capitalism. So when we're talking about democratic socialism, he's not, what I understand, and I heard him speak in 2019 on CNN, he gave a speech and he's talking about democratic socialism. And what it is, it's the idea that socialism doesn't work and capitalism does work. But capitalism creates oligarchies, it creates inequalities, it creates unfair advantages for certain individuals. So the democratic socialism puts restrictions on capitalism. So for example, it helps create Medicaid. It helps with environmental restrictions. It helps with minimum wage. It helps with people who are living paycheck to paycheck to help them get food on the table and pay for rent and utilities. And it helps with educations. And he also mentioned that there's not been a really increase in real wages, so there needs to be somebody, opposite of the individual, the invisible hand that Adam Smith talks about, the free market, there needs to be a literal hand by the government to kind of control and restrict capitalism. So what do you think about that? What do you think about Medicaid? What do you think about the economic inequalities that the U.S. sees today?
So I'm a little bit like, this is one of the issues I'm a bit on the fence on, you know, because at the end of the day, I think corporations in the United States have too much power, you know? That being said, I don't think it's something that comes as a result of corporations being free to do whatever they want just because. I think it comes more as a result because the government incentivizes corporations to do whatever they want, especially when it comes to healthcare and insurance. We've had this conversation before. But I think an argument for democratic socialism, would be that it's hard to look around you and see poverty and see people who clearly are not doing well and not have this desire inside of you to help them, I lived in Argentina for 2 years and I saw poverty every day. People living in literal shacks, dirt roads everywhere, so many people on drugs. It was just poverty everywhere, you know? And that made me feel sad for these people, and it made me want to help them. It made me want to see them live better lives, And the same thing is happening in the United States too. There are a lot of people in poverty. And so to give credit to people who support this idea, I think to an extent, it's this feeling of empathy that they have to care for other people, to lift other people up who are struggling economically, medically, in whatever aspect of their lives they might be struggling in, and make them live a better life.
Yeah.
You know? So like what do you think is like a good argument against that? That's like the role of the government is to make sure that people live good lives. Because at the end of the day, right, like we have the right to life, liberty, property, right? But if I'm living in squalor, like how am I going to enjoy any of those things? What's the point of living life? You know? So what do you think like would a good argument be against that?
I really like what you talked about, how the government is giving power to these large industries and these big corporations. I think that's a fair point. For example, let's take Medicaid and let's take Medicare. I don't know a ton about insurance. I don't know a ton about medical. But what I do know is Charlie Cook wrote in his book in 2016, it's time for a turning point. He talks about this. He says a solution for these problems that people don't have access to the Medicare, insurance are through the roof, hospital bills are unpayable. The solution to this is less government intervention, and more free market ideas. Let insurance companies and let the hospital, let them be competitive markets instead of restricted by the government. Ayn Rand's going to call this a coercive monopoly. Not a monopoly that's because I'm better than you, I'm dominating the industry. It's the government's giving me money and government's restricting other people to change the price. Because we know how supply and demand works. The more that there's supply, the price is going to go down if the demand's the same.
Right.
And if we can get that competition in, for example, the medical field, by getting the government out of insurance, getting the government out of Medicaid, making it something that I can choose the best price for the hospital for the surgery I need, best price for the pills that I need to take, best coverage for me, make it more specific. We introduce more competitors to the market. Charlie Kirk says that we're going to have such a better life. Insurances are going to go down, overall costs are going to go down, and quality is going to go up because there's going to be an incentive to join the firm. I don't know. What do you think? What's a good?
Yeah, like what I think just like, so what you're saying more than anything is that by creating more of a free market, incentivizes companies to reduce their prices and improve the quality of their care.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a free market idea.
100%.
That if there's more competitors, the best is going to win. The most efficient and the lowest cost is going to dominate the industry. And that's what we want as consumers.
For sure. And what would you say, like, against the argument, for example, like the reason that a lot of companies, for example, especially in the pharmaceutical industry, charge so much for their products, or that medical industry charges so much for its services, and its care, is because of the fact that there's so much cost in R&D, and that they have to charge a lot to be able to turn a profit, which is an inherently free market idea. But it also results in a lot of people like losing their lives. Like, what do you think a good argument against that would be?
Ooh, that's hard. I'm going to be honest. That's I've never really thought about that. What do you think of that?
I think it comes down to like, I'm a big supporter of the free market as well, right? It comes down to drawing lines and keeping lines there, you know? What happens a lot of the time when it comes to intellectual property laws, as far as like pharmaceuticals especially, is that they often they're profitable after a decently short amount of time, right? Because the R&D phase for like the average vaccine, for example, is roughly like 20 years, right? It's a long time of like researching and developing and trying to create a product, right? And so that's going to cost a lot of money, you know? It's one of the most expensive things that we can do. But they also charge so much initially that product often pays itself off really fast, right? And so I think the way that we do it is that we enforce the intellectual property laws that we have, as opposed to allowing these pharmaceutical companies and these healthcare companies to keep postponing or like giving themselves more time to have that intellectual property to that product, right? I'm a big proponent of free markets, but I think small antitrust laws are super important, and that's one of them, to ensure that the government isn't allowing pushing for these companies to have more time with their product, but saying we drew this line. Beyond that point, it's time for other people to have the chance to start building that product, so that we can have cheaper healthcare, cheaper pharmaceuticals overall. You know, I think another big thing is we just got to cut down on lobbying in the United States, right? The two industries that lobby the most in the United States Congress are, one, pharmaceutical companies with billions of dollars, right? I think it was well over, correct me if I'm wrong, I'll check this in editing and put like an overlay or something.
Yeah.
But I think it was over like $2 billion of money was poured into it in like 1 year alone, just from pharmaceutical companies.
Right.
And the second is insurance companies, right? So you've got pharmaceutical companies and insurance companies, the two kinds of industries that are going to profit the most from people being sick at the end of the day, right? And they're the ones that are paying the most to the government so that they can maintain their positions of power, right? So I think we really have to seriously consider and address the issues that are there, because as I see it, we don't have a free market healthcare system.
Yeah.
We have a healthcare system that's almost completely controlled by these unnatural government enforced monopolies.
Right.
And if we remove the scaffolding and remove all of these restrictions to allow for more healthcare companies, more pharmaceutical companies, more insurance companies to come into existence, then we're gonna see a big boom in the healthcare industry and in people being able to get the coverage and help that they need for cheaper, you know?
Yeah, I think that's you put that beautifully. And here's why I think you put it beautifully, is because you took a problem that both sides can agree with. Whether you're a Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal, you're saying there needs to be a change in medical care.
100%.
It's too expensive. People are dying, people are getting sick, and they don't have access to the proper care. Which is crazy because we're one of the most powerful nations in the world. So instead of solving that with government intervention and government controlling, let's let the free market do its thing, how we have with everything, and it should resolve itself. Let's enforce the intellectual laws. Let's enforce the property of people, and let's figure out the lobbying so that they don't maintain their power. They don't spend all this money maintaining their power. Let's put that money to investing in themselves, creating better products, and make it a free market. Allow competitors to come have a better product. I think that's beautiful. Let's talk about antitrust and monopolies, because I think that's another great example. So for viewers at home, antitrust, I think the best way to put it is just it's regulations that prohibit monopolies, price fixing, and mergers. So what we're saying is the government is going to try to restrict two entities from coming together to make a huge entity that controls the market and can put whatever price they want, and nobody can come in because they are too big and they have too low of cost, and so we're stuck. So that's kind of the idea of antitrust, is the government is going to impose these laws on the free market, kind of in a democratic socialistic idea to kind of restrict the free market just to protect the consumer. Because if you get somebody too big putting prices at a certain spot, we might be screwed. So what do you kind of elaborate on that? What do you think the problems of antitrust or monopolies are?
I think that the big thing that we have to recognize is that I would say that most monopolies are government created, right? Have you read Atlas Shrugged?
Yeah, of course. That's
Phenomenal book.
where I'm getting all these ideas.
I mean, at the end of the day, like, that story is about, for context, right? Because a lot of people haven't read that book. The story of that book, of Atlas Shrugged, is that there's like this woman, and she is the vice president of like a railroad company that spans across the United States, right? The problem is that increasingly more and more so, members of the United States government are socialists. The rest of the world, as from what I understand, is essentially made up of super socialist countries. They're super impoverished, and then you've got the United States, which is like the last like real free country, but it's slowly becoming more and more socialist as well, right? And so what happens is her brother, who's the president of the railroad company, and his friends, who are all like part of government agencies and own other railroad companies and other kinds of companies, they have this idea of creating the public good, but it's fairly selfish in the way that they kind of address it. And so they start pushing for the government to enforce policies that, for example, restrict certain companies from working in certain areas, or putting caps on companies so they can't work to a certain degree, right? Or kind of making certain companies bigger and better because they have friends, right? That is the kind of monopolies that are created by the government. When the government steps in and says, hey, we're going to make things fair and support this company because they're not doing as good as this company, right? That's when you start to see big monopolies being propped up in the United States, unnatural monopolies, right? As opposed to real monopolies, right? Which I would say aren't actually that dangerous or harmful, right? A real monopoly would be an example like Apple, for example, like
Right.
Jaxon had said before. They aren't they don't control all of the phone industry. Only like 50% of people in the United States have iPhones. The rest of people have Androids of different companies, right? But iPhone is the predominant company. And it's not because they've poured a ton of money into the government.
Right.
It's because they have created a product and a style and a brand that people connect with and that they
Right.
like and that they're comfortable with, right? And so that's why people go to Apple. On the other hand, it would be like we said, okay, we're gonna break Apple up, or the government is only gonna give money to like Windows or to Samsung, and like we're not gonna do anything to help iPhone. iPhone isn't allowed to produce more than this certain number of phones every year. That's where you have dangerous monopolies being created. So there's a distinction between a natural monopoly, for example, Apple, and unnatural monopolies, which would be like, for example, if Samsung was propped up by the United States government to distribute phones across the United States, right? That's an unnatural and harmful monopoly.
Right.
What do you think like the negative effects or the differences are between those monopolies, and how do you think we can make that distinction?
Yeah, I think let's look at the history of monopolies. Let's put ourselves in the perspective of this.
Right.
So we create a company and we don't get any intervention from the government. We make the best product. We have the lowest cost, we're the most efficient, and we provide it, and it's the best value to everybody.
Right.
And if we're dominating the market, if most people like our product and we maintain that for a long time, that's impressive. Ayn Rand is going to go and say in Atlas Shrugged that that's an impressive feat for the company to be able to maintain that without new firms coming into the market.
Right.
Because we know free market ideas, if one firm is receiving a lot of money because of low costs and there's a lot of profits being made, that's going to incentivize competition. And competitors come, make a better product, and earn this profit for themselves. Right. And so as a consumer, I'm seeing a company do that, I'm getting the best value no matter what, if it's a natural monopoly. Now you mentioned the unnatural monopoly, and I completely agree. Because now you have the government that's restricting the amount of output, for example, a company can do, or the merger or whatever, and that restriction is going to result into these price settings that are ridiculous. They're going to want to maintain the X amount of profit, so instead of being able to produce more and have a lower cost, they're actually going to raise their prices and they're going to screw over the consumer. So the government may be good intentioned in helping the consumer, helping the little guy out, needs to understand and fully adopt this free capitalistic ideas of, hey, let's let the market do its thing. Let's watch the products get better and the prices go down, because we know that's what's going to happen in free market.
Right.
So that's something that I would like to see the government, especially the federal government, do in regards to these monopolies. Get out of the monopolies, stop making unnatural coercive monopolies, and get into protecting the natural monopolies. For example, protecting the property of these businessmen, protecting the property of the individuals, because overall you're going to have better prices.
Right. And I guess my question would be then, kind of coming full circle, like how then can we make sure, I think the question of like a lot of people who are on the fence about like economic policy,
Right.
or who support socialism, right? The question is like, how can we create a society where less people are in poverty, and where less people are dying because of healthcare concerns or healthcare prices, or where people have the money to eat and to like pay for rent? Because I think that's something that I like very much like I'm sympathetic towards and I'm empathetic towards, because I've lived in a place where I've seen how bad it gets. And it's something where it's like, it hurts my heart to see people suffering and struggling, right? So I guess like at the end of the day, what can we do to ensure that these people are taken care of in a capitalistic society, right? Where it's so focused on incentivization and trying to build a profit and bettering yourself. How can we ensure still that the other people, the outliers, are helped? You know?
I think the biggest thing would be, there's two things that come to my mind. Teach kids about capitalism. Teach them what it means for free markets and the benefits of a free market. And then with that in mind, and if they truly understand how these free markets can benefit themselves, let them vote accordingly. Let's have a politician, let's have people run for Congress and the House and have these political positions to push and advocate for more free market policies. With these free market policies, for example, with insurance or even college education, let's make it more free. Let's make there be more competitors and less government intervention. So if you have everybody in the United States, and especially the outliers, the poor kids, you're teaching them about capitalism, the benefits, and how it can reward them. They're gonna they're gonna take initiative because they're gonna realize in order to get paid, I have to create value. And then B, you're gonna help them vote accordingly so that we have a nation that's so focused on protecting that free market instead of, hey, I need help, which is a valid because they do need help. I agree, I'm very empathetic to that. That they get help not from the government and from handouts and violations of private property, but they get help from free market and these ideas of the capitalism.
Right.
So I think the overall education's huge. And then if we can vote, especially the rising generation, vote accordingly, that politicians can really push for policies advocating for the freer markets, we're going to see increases in insurance. And when I say increases, I mean like the quality.
Right.
We're going to see decreases in prices. We're going to see decreases in overall college. How expensive it is to go to college. We're going to see decreases in prices. Overall quality is going to improve. And other situations and stuff like that. I think if we educate and let them vote, we'll see way better.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think like that result actually looks like? Like let's take the common Joe, for example, right? Someone who's working a 9-to-5 job at like a fast food restaurant or something, or a single mom who's working multiple jobs who is just getting by. Like how is that going to affect them positively, and what changes would they see in their lives? How is it going to make their lives easier?
Right.
You know?
Well, for starters, what I can see right off the bat is if we let these free markets and we're kind of taking the government out of our lives, taxes are going to go down. So that the money they make with their labor, they're going to keep a bigger percentage of it because it's not going to go to Medicaid. It's not going to go to paying off students' debts. It's not going to go to make these unnational monopolies. It's going to go to their pockets. And then what they can do is they can have that kind of idea of they're not stuck in the box, but they can create something. So for example, they can invest in new markets. They can invest in new firms that are going into insurance or that are going into providing education. They can invest in those companies and be rewarded for those intelligent investments. They can keep the higher property tax. They can keep a higher percentage of their income because we're going to cut down taxes.
Right.
And overall, I think it's going to help them think outside the box how to get money. Instead of relying so much on government handouts, they're going to take the initiative and be like, and kind of look outside the box. How can I be an entrepreneur? How can I give value? How can I get paid for my mind instead of just my physical labor?
Right.
So I think overall, that's a couple of benefits that I would like to see.
Awesome. Yeah, I think we've had a good conversation so
right.
far. Super interesting. I think like at the end of the day, it just comes down to like everyone's going to have their different opinions, right? I think everyone like sees it as like, oh, you like think the government should always be involved in everything or should never be involved in anything. But at the end of the day, it's like it's like a sliding scale, right? And even within the same political parties, people fall somewhere along that line, right? Everyone has a different perspective, right? Mm-hmm. What I think it's super important to take out of this discussion is that I think us, for example, as more conservative individuals, even though I don't personally, like, I'm not a big fan of the Republican or Democratic parties.
Right, me too.
But at the end of the day, I think we can take lessons from each side, right? The lesson that I would take from people who are more inclined to support like socialist concepts and ideas is the empathy that they have, which I think is honestly super admirable, that they care so much about people, right? And it's something that I share with a lot of people in that sense. I think people live some really hard lives and have to face a number of hard decisions that I can't even imagine having to face, right? I grew up in like a good family, and I've had a lot of benefits and a lot of blessings from God that have just come and given me the opportunity to be where I am today, right? A lot of people don't have those opportunities. So I think that's something we can take from one side, is that we need to have more empathy and care more for our neighbors and for the people who are downtrodden and who are facing issues in their lives, like donate to charities, give service to people, volunteer, help other people out, right? To make it, to really like profess what we talk about as far as a free market, right? Because that's what I take from the other side, right? Is that to really escape that box and to do what you want. I know I'm making like a circle or a heart with my hands,
You're
but
right, like whatever that is.
Whatever this shape is, you know, like at the end of the day, I think the way to achieve getting out of that box or that circle or whatever this shape is, right, is to pursue a more individual and incentive-based way of living your life. That being said, we should combine it with the exhortation of Christ,
Right.
and a lot of other great thinkers, to love others and to build up your neighbor and to love your neighbor and to take care of the needy and the downtrodden.
Right.
And the more that we do that of our own free will, right, employing that empathy, the more people are going to be able to see free markets and capitalist economies as something that's beneficial for the world, because they see capitalists and people who are pushing free market ideas as individuals who are also empathetic and care for their neighbor.
Right.
You know, that those are the two lessons I'd take.
No, yeah,
you know,
I think that, and it kind of applies to our episode about ICE. Because
Right.
there's like this underlying problem of immigration, there's underlying problem of that both sides agree,
Right.
but our way to approach it is different. And there's things to be learned from the both sides and their solutions. Like you're saying, empathy, but with a free market idea.
right.
And I agree. And I think that's what Turning Point stands for. We're trying to say, hey, here's the problem. The problem is people need to eat. We're impoverished. There's a problem with medical insurances and the problem with education and the costs. How do we fix it?
Right.
And that's where both sides are going to disagree. Let's try to find the truth. What's actually going to work? And I think there's truth from both sides.
Yeah.
Let's be empathetic. Let's be followers of Christ. But let's also trust in the free market. So I like that. Let's keep that as the lesson of the day.
There we go.
I think that's great.
Lesson of the day. Practice the empathy of someone who like might think differently than
Right.
you. I don't know. Just I think
Yeah.
a good lesson is just like accept the good from people who disagree with you.
Right.
You know, but also like recognize the good and recognize also the bad sometimes
Right.
of what you think.
And,
you know.
and I'll say it even a step further, learn your position better. Learn more about capitalism and its benefits.
100%.
And learn how it's going to help the country if we really vote accordingly.
Right.
So anyway, stay tuned, guys. We're loving this.
Yeah, it's been a good time.
We have some cool people coming in the podcast in the future. Let us know if you have anything you want to talk about. If you want to be on the podcast, reach out. And we are going to be tabling. Come to the event at the end of this month. It'll be on our Instagram and our socials. And if you want to get involved, let us know.
Yeah. Thanks for coming, guys. Thanks for watching. Appreciate it. Have a good
care.
one.